Has anyone ever told you that running a business or doing something else in your life is the same as rocket science? Well, we just saw a rocket launch, and that looks pretty complicated if you watched the Artemis II launch a couple days ago. Now, I will say that creating a comp structure for your therapist can feel almost as complicated as rocket science. It is quite complicated. You're not quite launching humans into space, but you are hopefully launching them out into the community to do good work. And it's hard to find a pay structure that makes sense for them and for you. And it's easy, and there's not a ton of admin work, and there's just a lot of variables there. So, I want to talk to you about three questions to ask yourself before finalizing a comp structure with a therapist on your team or just in general for your practice. This is definitely something where you want to do your homework ahead of time, do your work, do some consulting, and then get into that. Why am I talking about this? Because most of what we talk about with clients is related to pay structures, transitioning pay structures, editing pay structures, looking at bad pay structures, looking at good pay structures. We do a lot with pay structures and compensation plans because they're one of the most complicated parts of running a private practice, and you got to get it right to get profitable. If you have a poor pay structure or one that is bulky and difficult to understand or is not incentivizing to your therapist, being profitable is going to be really tough. If you have one that is the opposite of all those things, right? It's a good mix between you and the therapist. It's profitable. It's easy to understand. It's incentivizing. It's going to be a lot easier to be profitable generally for your practice. So, three questions. And all of these, I'm going to show you a tool at the end here that you can use to kind of look at all of these visually as well. But these are the questions you want to ask while looking at that tool. The first one is really just, hey, where's the break-even point for my therapist with this pay structure? Really just thinking through how many visits does that therapist need to do to reach a break-even point. Break-even point means that when they actually start bringing in profit for your practice. Being below the break-even point would mean that you're still paying the costs for them to be at the practice. Maybe they're covering some of the operating costs. Being past that break-even point would mean all the costs have been covered, and we're now generating cash that's going to stay in the business that we can go use for other things. So what is that break-even point? And really the question there is how many sessions per week does that look like? That then gives you the minimum that you need to give to that therapist, the expectation to them saying you need to do at least 15 sessions a week or whatever that number is to be working here at this practice in the capacity that you're in. This is true both for part-time and full-time therapists. Everyone should have a break-even point. Everyone should know what it is, and they should have a clear expectation that you meet with them and talk to them about with that. Shout out to our pals at Practice Vital. Easy to track how many visits they're doing, what their averages are, what the expectation is, and also great data to share with them, with the therapist, in kind of a nice visual way. They're not telling me to say that. I'm not getting paid to say that. I just like Practice Vital and think it's valuable. All right. Secondly, okay, first one is, what's that break-even point? How does that all work together? Second one, does this structure that we created actually incentivize our team to do what we want them to do? So specifically, this means are there pieces in this pay structure that's going to incentivize my clinician to do probably more sessions? Really, usually what you're going to incentivize your therapist to do is to do more sessions because the more full-time they are, the more sessions they're doing, generally the more profitable they'll be for the practice. The more good work you're doing in the community, the more mental health or any sort of therapy that you're doing is being given to the community, right? So what incentivization is happening? Oftentimes this can happen through like a bonus plan or incentive plan, something like that. But the question is, what is my employee here or contractor incentivized to do? You may have a pay structure that is very complicated, where there's a bunch of different phases and a bunch of different kind of tiers, and that can work, but oftentimes that will not lead to someone being incentivized to increase sessions, but it may just make them confused. You may have a salary structure, which could work, but oftentimes what happens with the salary structure is if the right type of person is not in that salary structure, they are incentivized to keep doing exactly what they're doing and not do more sessions, right? I'm going to get paid the same whether I do 80 sessions or 60 sessions. I'm going to stay put. It's pretty normal human nature to think that, right? So think through like what is kind of the philosophy and the incentivizing behind this pay structure and how does that all work? You want to make sure this pay structure is easy to understand both for you or whoever's running your payroll so that you don't have to, run through 5 different spreadsheets to pay somebody, but also for your therapist so that it's easy for them to know if I do this, then this happens, right? If I do 20 sessions this week, on my next pay period, I'll get an extra $100. Just an example. But you want some sort of easy, if this, then this situation if you're trying to incentivize them to a certain number of sessions or retention or whatever your metric is with that. We see this with a lot of different practices. It can happen in almost unlimited ways, but I think it is helpful to have some sort of performance-based incentive or bonus or something like that. Again, the expectations are the key part. What is the expectation for the therapist? How is that measured? And do they actually know about this? Are you meeting with them, updating them on progress? Or is it just we tell them when they first get hired here and then we're not talking about it again, outside of maybe once a year or once in a blue moon? So make sure you're having those consistent conversations, you or someone on your team, to make sure you're talking through that. And third, have you actually modeled this structure to know exactly how it's going to impact your financial story? So have you run the numbers, right? This is always the tricky part, right? Where our kind of thought of the pay structure actually, the rubber meets the road, and we're thinking, does this actually make sense for us as a practice? Now, the tricky thing when you're modeling out a pay structure, number one is having the right tool to do it, but I'm going to give you that, so that's fine. But the second part is making sure that you're including all the costs. That could be things like PTO, holidays, admin pay, random state benefits you have to pay for, random state programs you have to pay for, all those things, right? Employer payroll taxes. What are all those things besides the base pay that you have to pay for and you will have to include in your costs when you're looking at them? You need to make sure you include all those pieces, because oftentimes if you're including just the base pay and maybe the 401k, but you forgot PTO or you forgot holidays or you forgot the employer taxes, you're forgetting about anywhere between 4 to 8 or more % of revenue going away from that, or going to the therapist and away from your practice. So you need to model everything, and you want to make sure you're including everything. Now, you don't necessarily need to look at it at that granular of a level, every single month, but when you're first creating this pay structure, you do want to really get everything into the model so you know exactly what it all looks like. We've seen it too many times where we forgot about PTO or something like that, and it completely changed the whole calculation and the narrative, and all of a sudden a pay structure that we thought was nicely positive now is more like break even or worse, and that's not a great situation. I'm going to cut to a quick little video of me going over the tool and the model that you can use to go over this. This model is going to give you basically the full breakdown of what you can afford, how it impacts your practice financially, and best of all, this tool is available for you. We've made it super user-friendly. So I'm going to switch to that now, but make sure you follow those 3 questions before you finalize any comp structure. Look through those, do your homework ahead of time, and if you do those 3 things, I can't say that you're going to be able to launch a rocket into space, but you may launch a successful career or a successful partnership with a therapist in your practice. All right, let's talk about how to use this tool. This is our clinician compensation tool, and it's really how you can forecast and plan for any compensation structure to make sure that it's going to work for you. So this box here is probably the most important. You're going to put in all the numbers that matter to you. Your session fee, I would just use an average. If it's for someone specific, you can put in their specific session fee. The average amount of visits per month that you'd expect them to do. If there's any admin pay, what the pay split is going to be. This is just a flat percentage rate. The one down here is an hourly rate if you want to use that instead. If you're going to have an employer 401k match, and then if you're going to have health insurance, you can update all those. This is your employer payroll tax rate. You can look this up for your state. If you search Gusto state tax rate calculator or ADP state tax calculator, they both have one that you can use. At baseline, this is about 7.5% for Medicare and Social Security. And then usually state level benefits programs, things like that, usually add another 1 to 1.5%, though it can get as high as 2, 3, 4% that comes in from the state, depending on your state. If you want to look at the employee side, you can add in what their income tax rate would be here for state and federal to get an idea of what they're going to make from this. If there's any pieces as far as benefits, maybe like a PTO or a holidays or anything like that, that you're going to pay out that are not included in here, what you can do is you can simply add a row right in here. You could call it PTO holidays, figure out what that cost is going to be per month. Basically what you're thinking about is you'd say, if we're going to pay out, 10 days of PTO, We could say, 10 times whatever their general rate is going to be for that. Maybe that's going to be like $60. So you actually do 10 times 8 hours times $60 divided by 12, and that'd give you like the monthly rate for that. And then you just would need to update a couple of formulas here just to make sure that you're including the holidays in there as well. So that's definitely very possible. You can definitely do that if you want. If you need to edit it for any other benefits like that, you can customize it. This is covering most of the main ones though, and anything you change over here will automatically update into the sheet. So that's pretty easy as well, which is nice. So feel free to, if you're not going to have a 401k match, you can remove that. If you're not going to have health insurance, you can remove that. So you can really pare it down as much as you need to. But this is really that tool that you're going to use to really forecast out exactly how that pay structure is going to look. What you want to kind of come out with at the end is you want to see this number here, COGS. This is the percentage of revenue being spent on your therapists. This should be 60% or less, all in. And you can see right now it's at about 70%, so it's red. If we lower this to 50 or 45%, you can see that number keeps coming down. If we increase any of these other things or change them, that number will also change, and you kind of see how the profit also is changing here. So a lot of customization that you can do with this. Totally up to you, kind of to input the right pieces here to make it match your pay structure. But this is that step that you do need to take to make sure that you know exactly what the costs are going to be for any pay structure. You want to do this before you share it with your team, so that you've kind of run the numbers, you know how they're going to work. You've looked at contingencies, like what if somebody only does 40 sessions instead of 80? What does that mean for us? And what does that mean for our profit, right? For example. So good luck. Let me know if you have any questions. If you have questions, shoot me an email. You can even tag me on your sheet and I will see it as well. Nate at navigatorbookkeeping.us.